I remember the day I first set foot in Parkside Oaks, an upscale suburban community located on the outskirts of Atlanta, Georgia. It was early spring, and the dogwood trees lining the streets were in bloom, showering the sidewalks with white petals. Each house boasted a well-kept lawn, neatly trimmed hedges, and freshly painted shutters. The real estate agent spoke of an active homeowners association, a selling point for some, a red flag for others. But at the time, I thought a well-run HOA might keep the neighborhood harmonious and safe. After a whirlwind month of paperwork, I purchased a cozy two-story home with pale blue siding, a spacious backyard, and a driveway just large enough for 2 cars. The day I moved in, a few neighbors waved politely, offering quick greetings. One of them, Linda Banks, even brought me a plate of cookies to welcome me. She told me about local farmers markets, the best pizza place in town, and how to navigate the sprawl of strip malls just beyond the neighborhood. Yet from the moment I arrived, one woman kept appearing at odd intervals, striding briskly by with a clipboard in hand, or lingering near mailboxes in a pastel cardigan. She was tall, with a short honey-brown bob, and held herself with an air of authority. Each time I glanced at her, she gave me a tight, cool smile that never reached her eyes. After a few days, Linda clued me in. That's Marilyn Tatum, but everyone calls her Karen behind her back. She's on the HOA board, and she's intense. Curious, I asked Linda why the name Karen. With a slight grin, Linda explained that Marilyn behaved like a stereotypical Karen, always complaining, always demanding, always right. I shrugged, thinking it might be exaggerated gossip. But Linda merely patted my arm. Just wait. You'll see. Over the next few weeks, I settled into the house, painting walls, planting a row of small hydrangeas near my front porch, and meeting other neighbors. One morning, while I was tidying up the yard, Karen approached me with a forced smile. She introduced herself as Marilyn Tatum from the HOA, rapidly pivoting to mention important guidelines. Her tone was civil but laced with an undercurrent of condescension. She rattled off rules about lawn height, acceptable fence colors, and when trash bins must be removed from the curb. I nodded politely, assuring her I'd follow the rules. Karen tapped her clipboard, glancing around my yard as though searching for infractions. Eventually, she sniffed and said, "I'll be keeping an eye out. Just make sure you're not violating any codes." With that, she spun on her heel and left. In a typical neighborhood, such a conversation might be a friendly check-in. But something about Karen's demeanor, her clipped speech, her pointed stares, put me on edge. Linda's warning echoed in my mind. I hoped our paths wouldn't cross often. Little did I know that Karen's meddlesome presence would soon become inescapable. Life in Parkside Oaks was pleasant at first. The HOA events were well organized, a summer barbecue in the local park, a modest 4th of July fireworks display, and monthly newsletters discussing community updates. I tried to stay on good terms with the association, even attending a couple of board meetings out of curiosity. There, I saw Karen at her element. She spoke forcefully about maintaining standards and protecting property values, brandishing her clipboard like a scepter of power. Neighbors whispered stories about her, how she once threatened a fine because someone left a hammock up in their front yard, or how she demanded that another neighbor repaint their house because the shade of beige was too bold. Many shrugged her off as a busybody, but also admitted that crossing her could result in real consequences, as she seemed to have influence over the more timid HOA board members. For a few months, I escaped Karen's scrutiny. I mowed my lawn regularly, kept my hedges neatly trimmed, and moved my trash bin back from the curb by the evening of pickup day, as per the rules. Yet, I often spotted Karen prowling the street on Tuesday mornings, trash collection day, scowling if any neighbor placed their bags out too early or in a slightly off position. She'd mutter about clutter or obstruction, scribbling in her ever-present clipboard. One mild Tuesday, I walked outside to see Karen standing in front of my neighbor's house, arms crossed, glaring at a pair of garbage bags that were set out on the curb. A swirl of tension seemed to follow her. The garbage truck rumbled down the street a few minutes later, but Karen stuck around, as though measuring the distance between the bags and the driveway. Eventually, the truck emptied the bins, the driver waved, and the big vehicle lumbered off. Karen watched them go, her expression sour. Then she shook her head and stomped away. A few days later, Linda confided in me that Karen had lodged multiple complaints about trash bin violations with the HOA. She acts like half an inch over the property line is a mortal sin, Linda said, rolling her eyes. She's always trying to tighten the rules about how we place our garbage for pickup. It puzzled me. Why such an obsession with trash day? But I dismissed it as just another of Karen's quirks. After all, the existing guidelines were clear. Place your bins or bags at the curb on collection day, retrieve them by nightfall, and don't block driveways. That was standard for many neighborhoods. The last thing I expected was that Karen would escalate this trivial matter into an all-out confrontation. Yet that was precisely what she did. Autumn arrived, bringing cooler air and vibrant foliage. Parkside Oaks looked picturesque with its rows of golden and red leaves rustling in the breeze. My life felt settled. Work was steady, and my evenings were often spent reading on the porch or chatting with neighbors. But on one fateful Tuesday, I overslept slightly, rushing outside around 8 a.m. to place my garbage bags by the curb. Usually, I set them out earlier, but an unexpected morning meeting had me scrambling. The big green truck typically arrived sometime between 7 and 9 a.m. That day, as I hurried to the curb, I noticed Karen lurking on the sidewalk. She gave me a disapproving glare, apparently irked that I hadn't placed the trash out sooner. I murmured a polite, "Good morning," but she sniffed and turned away. I shrugged and headed back inside, ignoring her vibe. A few minutes later, I heard the distinctive rumble of the garbage truck turning onto our street. I glanced out the window, curious if they'd come for my bags next. To my astonishment, I saw Karen marching into the road, arms flailing, positioning herself in front of my stretch of curb. The truck slowed, its driver leaning out to see what was happening. Straining to hear, I caught fragments of Karen's tirade. "He's always late with his trash. It inconveniences me. Can't you skip him this week?" My jaw dropped. Skip me? Because I set my bags out at 8 a.m. instead of 7? She was essentially blocking the truck from getting to my trash. The driver, a burly man in an orange vest, shook his head, gesturing that he had a job to do. But Karen stayed put, ranting about how inconsistent placement times were causing her stress. Before I could intervene, the driver eased the truck forward, presumably to maneuver around her. Karen sidestepped, maintaining her stance in the narrow street. This was beyond ridiculous. She was physically hindering waste collection over a personal annoyance. The standoff lasted a couple of tense minutes. Finally, seeing no immediate resolution, the truck driver revved the engine and rolled on, bypassing my curb entirely. Karen glared triumphantly at my untouched garbage bags. Stunned, I rushed outside, but by then, the truck had turned the corner. Karen fixed me with a smug smile. "Next time," she said icily, "try putting them out when everyone else does. You're not above the rules." I stared, speechless, watching her march away. The nerve. Not only had she no authority to block the street, but she'd effectively sabotaged my trash pickup. Furious, I tried calling the city's waste management line, but it went to voicemail. Linda, witnessing the aftermath, shook her head in disbelief. "She's gone too far this time," Linda murmured. "You should report her." That night, I lugged the uncollected garbage bags back to my backyard, something that could attract pests if left too long. My anger smoldered. I tried lodging a complaint with the HOA, but no one responded promptly. Meanwhile, Karen patrolled the block as usual, her chin held high, as if proud of her stunt. I decided enough was enough. If Karen was willing to physically obstruct city workers on a public street just because she felt annoyed, there was no telling what else she might do. The next time trash day rolled around, I'd be prepared. The following week, I mulled over how best to handle Karen's outrageous behavior. Some neighbors suggested confronting her directly, but Karen thrived on conflict. She'd likely twist my anger into an excuse to label me a troublemaker. Others advised waiting for the HOA to take action, but the board was notoriously slow, and Karen had allies within it. Linda recommended contacting the city's waste management department to file an official complaint. That seemed logical, but I had no hard evidence beyond my word against Karen's. Then an idea struck. What if I recorded her? If Karen tried to block the truck again, I'd capture it on my phone. Actual footage of her physically preventing a municipal service from reaching my house would be unassailable proof. The city wouldn't be able to ignore that. Neither would the HOA. Over the years, I'd heard countless stories of Karen types caught on video, footage that swiftly ended petty power trips. I hoped I wouldn't have to stoop to that, but if she repeated her antics, it would be her own fault. So, I charged my phone, tested its video capabilities, and mentally rehearsed how to stay calm if she attempted another blockade. In the meantime, I stored last week's uncollected trash in large sealed bins to prevent odor and pests. I made sure to put out just one bag in the official bin a day before the next collection day to avoid a surplus. I also pinned a note on my fridge, trash day, Tuesday morning. Start recording at 7 a.m. The plan was straightforward. If Karen showed up, I'd capture the entire incident from my driveway. If she didn't, great. Maybe she decided it wasn't worth continuing her vendetta. As the week passed, I felt a mixture of anxiety and resolve. Karen sent me a pointed email with the HOA letterhead, though it was likely just her personal message, reminding me of standard trash procedures and compliance deadlines. She ended with, "Failure to adhere may result in warnings or fines." The gall of that woman. She had no right to threaten me after her stunt. But I said nothing. Instead, I bided my time, waiting for Tuesday to arrive. Trash day dawned cool and overcast. I woke up extra early, around 6 a.m., and quietly placed my bin at the curb with a couple of neatly bagged items inside, fully compliant with the HOA's rules. My phone was at 100% battery, the video app open and ready. Then I waited, sipping coffee in my living room, occasionally peeking out the front window. Sure enough, around 7:30, I spotted Karen strolling down the sidewalk, wearing a pastel pink sweatshirt and carrying a small notebook. She paused near my bin, scanning the street as if anticipating the garbage truck. My pulse quickened, both from nerves and from a sort of grim anticipation. If she tried anything, I'd have the proof. At 7:40, the faint roar of the garbage truck drifted down the block. Karen turned, stepping off the curb into the street. My heart pounded. I positioned myself near the window, phone in hand, quickly hitting the record button. Through the glass, I had a clear vantage of Karen's figure as the truck approached. The same driver from last week rolled up, presumably recognizing me from the fiasco before. He slowed, preparing to extend the mechanical arm or simply stop for my bin. But once again, Karen stepped forward, arms waving, placing herself between the truck and my trash. She shouted something about inconvenience and unapproved changes. Even from inside, I could hear her shrill voice echo through the cool morning air. My phone camera captured every moment. I decided to step out onto the porch, phone held at chest level to keep filming. The driver cut the engine, presumably not wanting to run her over. Karen launched into a tirade. "He's out of compliance. He's messing up the schedule for everyone else. I'm requesting that you pass by without collecting his trash." She pointed at me, glaring. The driver attempted to reason with her. "Ma'am, I have to pick up this address. It's on my route." But Karen refused to move, repeating that she felt annoyed and disrupted. At one point, she even pivoted to scold me directly. "Maybe this will teach you to respect the standard hours." I kept filming, my voice calm as I said, "Karen, please let them do their job. My bin is out on time and in compliance." She turned to me, eyes flashing. "You think you can just break community rules? I'm well within my rights to make a complaint." After nearly 3 minutes of heated back and forth, the driver radioed someone, likely a supervisor, for guidance. Meanwhile, Karen planted her feet, refusing to budge from the truck's path. Finally, the radio crackled. The driver shrugged and told Karen, "Look, ma'am, I can't keep holding up the route." He angled the truck forward, inching closer, but Karen sidestepped again. Everything was on video. My phone's microphone picked up her words, her determined scowl, her admission that she simply felt annoyed by my garbage. Then she threatened to call the HOA and the police if the truck tried to pass. That's when I stepped onto the sidewalk, stating loud enough for the camera to catch, "Karen, you are physically blocking a public utility. This is against city regulations." Her only response was a scoff. The driver, exasperated, threw his hands up and rumbled on, leaving my bin untouched for the second week in a row. Karen marched away with a victorious smirk. But as she passed me, I carefully panned the phone so it caught her profile. She seemed to realize I'd been recording, but it was too late. The evidence was collected in full. As soon as Karen disappeared down the block, my neighbor Linda hurried over, having witnessed everything from her driveway. Did you record that? Linda asked breathlessly. I nodded, showing her a snippet of the video on my phone. She shook her head in disbelief. She's lost her mind, interfering with the garbage service like that. I wasted no time. From my computer, I emailed the city's public works/waste management department, attaching the video file with a concise explanation of the situation. I wrote, Dear Waste Management Team, I am a resident of Parkside Oaks. For the past 2 weeks, my trash pickup has been obstructed by a neighbor who physically stands in the road and refuses to let your truck collect my garbage. I recorded the incident this morning, which you can see in the attached video. She claims she is annoyed by my trash schedule, even though I am following standard guidelines. This seems to be a clear case of obstructing a public service. I kindly request your assistance and guidance on how to handle this. My address is redacted. I am available to discuss further if needed. Thank you. My name. Within an hour, I received an automated reply acknowledging my email, followed by a more personal message from a city official who stated they would review the footage and speak with the waste management supervisor. It was a relief. At least I knew someone was taking it seriously. I also considered sending the video to the HOA, but I suspected Karen might try to bury the complaint if she had influence over the board. Instead, I decided to wait for the city's response first. In the meantime, Linda posted a generic warning in the neighborhood's social media group. Blocking city services can lead to fines. Let's keep things civil on trash day. She didn't name Karen, but everyone guessed the reference. For 2 days, I heard nothing concrete. My uncollected trash bags once again had to be hauled into a sealed bin behind my house. The tension lingered in the air. Karen, oddly, avoided me, perhaps suspecting I'd escalated the matter. Then, on Thursday afternoon, my phone rang. A representative from the Public Works Department introduced himself as Mr. Bowers. He explained that they had thoroughly reviewed the video, recognized the street and the truck, and were preparing a formal response. To put it simply, he said, your neighbor is violating local ordinances by obstructing the trash collection. We'll be issuing a warning or possible citation for interfering with a public service. We'll also arrange for your trash to be picked up ASAP. I exhaled with relief, thanking him profusely. He asked for a few more details, my trash bin location, the times of the blockade, and I provided them. Before hanging up, Mr. Bowers assured me that the city took this kind of harassment seriously. No resident has the right to stand in the road and deny garbage collection for personal reasons, he said. We'll contact her directly and let her know the consequences if she doesn't comply. That evening, Linda and a few other neighbors came by to celebrate the good news. One older gentleman, Mr. Strickland, mentioned he'd had run-ins with Karen in the past, though never to this extent. She's always pushing her luck, but I guess she's finally gone too far, he remarked. I nodded, feeling vindicated yet aware the situation might still escalate. If Karen had any sense, she'd back down. But she had shown little sense so far. The next morning, a smaller city waste truck arrived unannounced, specifically to pick up my backlog of garbage. A friendly driver hopped out, apologized for the inconvenience, and loaded the bags with a portable lift. I thanked him and gave him a bottle of water, feeling a swell of gratitude that my weeks-long ordeal was finally resolved. He mentioned that the city had sternly warned someone named Marilyn Tatum not to obstruct city vehicles again. After they left, I breathed easier. That afternoon, while I was trimming shrubs in my front yard, Karen suddenly appeared. She wore a frosty expression, clutching a piece of paper. Without preamble, she thrust it toward me. Is this your doing? She snapped. The document turned out to be an official notice from the city, referencing the obstruction of a municipal service, demanding compliance under threat of fines. I looked her square in the eye. If you mean did I send video evidence of you blocking the garbage truck? Yes, I did. My tone was measured, but I refused to be cowed. Karen's cheeks flamed. How dare you go behind my back to the city? This is an HOA matter, not a public one. I shook my head, fighting to keep calm. You literally stood in the street, preventing a city service from doing its job, twice. That's public property. Karen, not HOA property. You had no authority to do that, and you know it. You left me with no choice. She huffed, crossing her arms. I was protecting the neighborhood from people who disregard our trash guidelines. I have every right as a board member to ensure compliance. A strangled laugh escaped me. The city has footage of you admitting it was because you felt annoyed. This wasn't about guidelines. It was a personal vendetta. I jerked my chin at the letter in her hand. If you keep it up, the city might hit you with larger fines or even legal action for endangering sanitation. This is serious. Karen glared, her righteous bluster evaporating under the weight of possible legal trouble. She tried to pivot. Well, if you had simply placed your trash out earlier. I held up a hand. Enough. The schedule is 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. I'm allowed to put it out at any point in that window. You're making up rules that don't exist. For a long moment, we stood there, the tension so thick it felt like a tangible presence. Finally, Karen huffed again, spun on her heel, and marched away without another word. I suspected she might lash out further. Yet, at least now she faced city repercussions, not just a neighborly scolding. She'd have to think twice before pulling another stunt. Sure enough, the next HOA bulletin came out that weekend, with a vague mention about respecting municipal services and reminding residents not to stand in the street on collection day. It didn't specifically name Karen, but everyone guessed the culprit. Meanwhile, Linda and others gave me supportive nods whenever they saw me. It was clear the neighborhood recognized Karen had crossed a major line. In the weeks that followed, trash day finally returned to normal. I'd set out my bin, the truck would arrive, and everything proceeded without incident. Karen was noticeably subdued on Tuesdays, no longer patrolling with her clipboard or haranguing the waste management crew. Word spread that she'd been fined by the city for obstructing public services and slapped with a stern warning about sanitation hazards. Rumor had it that the HOA board also called her out, worried about potential legal liabilities for the association. While she didn't publicly apologize, her retreat spoke volumes. She was no longer seen swaggering around the block, scanning for minor infractions. Her presence became sporadic, as if she realized she'd lost the moral high ground. Of course, Karen being Karen, she still found small ways to assert herself, sending a newsletter rant about keeping lawns uniformly trimmed or complaining about holiday decorations that lingered past the official end date. But the neighbors, emboldened by her defeat, pushed back. Each time she tried to resurrect her old bullying ways, residents reminded her that she'd already been caught and fined once. The memory of that video overshadowed her attempts at intimidation. For my part, I felt immense relief. No longer did I need to worry about my garbage pileup or the possibility of dealing with pests. I also felt a certain satisfaction that justice had been served. I'd approached the conflict calmly, documented her obstruction, and let the city enforce the law. One Tuesday afternoon, weeks after the entire debacle, I stepped outside just as the garbage truck rumbled away. The driver gave me a friendly wave, and I returned it with a smile. At the corner of the street, Karen stood by her mailbox, wearing a strained expression. She looked my way but quickly looked down, as if unsure how to face me. I simply inclined my head, polite but detached. In that moment, I felt the power dynamics shift. No longer was Karen the unstoppable HOA matriarch. She was just another neighbor, reined in by the knowledge that no one had to tolerate her tantrums. She might still act out in small, petty ways, but her capacity to inflict real harm had been diminished. Life in Parkside Oaks returned to its usual rhythm, quiet, organized, and mostly pleasant. The next HOA meeting featured more practical discussions about landscaping budgets and community potlucks, with less time wasted on trash bin controversies. Linda, Mr. Strickland, and I sometimes exchanged knowing smiles when the topic of compliance arose. The saga of Karen's garbage blockade had become neighborhood lore, a cautionary tale of what happens when someone tries to control the uncontrollable. Despite everything, I bore no lingering bitterness. Instead, I felt a quiet sense of accomplishment for having stood up for myself, and by extension, for others subjected to Karen's overreach. I also learned a valuable lesson. When faced with a petty tyrant, sometimes the best strategy is to remain calm, gather evidence, and trust the appropriate channels to deliver justice. Even now, if I catch a glimpse of Karen on a Tuesday morning, I recall the day she physically blocked the garbage truck, determined to impose her will. Then I remember the phone footage that brought her down. I offer a cordial wave to the waste management crew, thanking them for their service. And in that simple gesture, I find more satisfaction than Karen's self-appointed authority ever brought her.